Any of the major transportation projects that were ever built were ever affordable, period. So we walk into Grand Central and we look and marvel and say, how did they do that then? We're going to look at the PATH station and say, how did they ever do that? The fact is they did it because really there's no alternative not to do it. And the cost, cost is a huge issue, but I have a slightly different opinion. I would certainly say I'd put it on hold, I'd take a look, but I think that we're all about transportation. Mayor Bloomberg did a study when Dan Dockeroff, I guess it was in their first term or second term, and they looked at some of the ramifications of population growth, et cetera, in New York City, and we were devastated in the 1970s with it. But one of the things, the only correlation they found between population growth or decrease in over the years was railroad track. And I think we lost about 12 miles of railroad track all over the city. When we started adding back, our population starts to increase a little bit more because we can handle it. And so I'm a huge believer of figuring out how to do it, making it work, and figure out how to spend it and do it.
There.
I have a question for, I guess it's for Councilman, but I try and try to the general architectural question about, you said that, sort of what is the fattest part of the real estate market is sort of small businesses that sort of chop up the space. And I'm just thinking about what the implications of that are for a lot of the buildings that were built sort of in Rockefeller's period, like the Gordon Bunshaft, big modernist monolith buildings, or even like the World Trade Center, where they sought to have really open, unobstructed floor space. Do those buildings have a certain shelf life to them if the market is more for a smaller type entity?
My opinion is they absolutely have a need, and it's very important. What I did for my investment was, if I liken it to the Navy, right? They have huge aircraft carriers out in there, and every aircraft carrier needs a flotilla of hospitals and ships and troop ships and food supply ships and oil and all that. And so I was just one of these ships that support the aircraft carrier. So for our buildings here, an example next door to us is 60 Wall, right? It's 1.6 million square feet plus or minus. Deutsche Bank came in. It's an aircraft carrier. And we have all the little supply ships next to it, like 48 Wall Street and all the other buildings. Much more work because more tenants, but safer. If somebody moves out, they're not going to hurt us as much. So, but we do need the larger buildings. And I think that the business is going to stay that way. And the big tenants are still here, and they're very, very important. It's just not the big part of the marketplace necessarily. And an example of that is if you look at 25 Broad, which I think I still own right now, but Lehman is negotiating. I don't know. There's somewhere in there, but I think technically I do. And it was the building, it was the largest building in America at the time when it was built. And it was an office building, and it housed the most, sophisticated offices then, which were small little cubby holes, basically, they're apartments, and a lot of window lines, very small depth. So when that got converted from a prior owner to residential, it was perfect because what the office market then was residential. That has changed dramatically. I don't think it's going to go back that way necessarily. So we do need the big, huge buildings, and I think that's important. It's just not. Everybody thinks it's the market. It's just not necessarily the market, but a critically important part of the market.
Brenda?
This was a fabulous panel. Thank you all very much, and thanks to the two museums for organizing it. This is a question for Alex and Rob. I love the fact that Alex said that city planning obsesses over the details. So this should be the challenge for you all. Coming here tonight, the security really is very interesting. The nuggets and the steel picket fence.
No-goes.
I know, I call them nuggets. The financial capital. And the steel picket fence are great. And then inside, you have these schmoddy movable, that's a planning term, movable barriers. Somebody needs to be able to design something that looks better than those. I mean, there's got to be a market for it. So it just destroys what you're seeing.
Maybe I can add on to that, to the question, since we're at the conclusion, I think, of this evening. But if Liz, Rob, and Alex could all comment on, I think to ask the question in a larger way, what does Wall Street still need changed about the public realm, whether it's security, the streetscape, the uses? What are the biggest things we need to change?
Although the first thing I should say is that we agree with you about French barricades. They don't have any place on Wall Street, in part because they're a temporary device used for temporary crowd control, but it's been 9.5 years. And we, not temporary anymore, it's 2 leasing cycles. So one of the things that we've been doing, and we work very closely with city planning, and we've worked together. In fact, we clean the no-goes, so we're very focused on them, is think about what are movable, portable, but the key is really low-cost improvements to the public realm, because security has an unbelievable price tag that makes sense in the short term, but not really in the long term. And I think that is really the challenge. Not just what do we need. I think we need resolution of traffic mobility. I think we need to kind of understand that we've achieved a certain level of security and be comfortable with that until we're no longer comfortable with that. We need to make the connections that Alex talked about from Trinity Church to the Eastern Waterfront Plan. But the issue of who pays for what is really a big one.
In the history of the designs for the district, there were many, many iterations of what to do with what was called the pedestrian standoff for the New York Stock Exchange. And although 9.5 years is a very long time, if you own a building here and you lease here and you work here and walk here in the life of the city, it's a relatively short time. I mean, you think about how long it takes to consider, design, fund, build, occupy things. And one of the decisions that came out of city planning during the course of our work there was to determine that boundary was temporary and that no permanent installation would go into place or be prepared that would ever acknowledge that as a permanent thing. And although that may seem like a relatively small step in the course of that long exercise, it actually has made that a temporary barrier. And I believe it is temporary in the long-term play of the city. And that's what we designed for.
You're really
We care ultimately and most about the quality of the public realm. And security is an element of the public realm, but it's an element like so many others. And I think the over-ballardization, of having too many apparatuses in place, that when that starts to occlude the primary mission of a street, which is to form a great place for the public to be in, which I think Wall Street now does a wonderful job of, and the no-goes are beautiful, and that's why now they're becoming iconic. And I guess my only response, and it's something we face every single day in a variety of projects, and our attitude coming into every meeting has to be that the pedestrian comes first.
There's one phrase that we kept as a mantra during that phase, and maybe you can borrow that as a constituency to push that fence back a little bit. But all the security guys were always, every foot counts. And the response of the city planning and the design team was always, hey, we're with the pedestrians, every inch counts. So.